Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this, our third of our winter webinars on how to provide good foot care for the sound and lame horses. If you've been with us before, you'll know that you're obviously joining us by Zoom. We're just going to mark time very quickly whilst we wait for those who are joining us on Facebook Live to join us, and then we can kick off. Just remember, if you enjoy what you're viewing through our webinars, then please send us some other ideas to cover in future webinars by emailing education@worldhorsewelfare.org. And so just to repeat the welcome to those who have joined us by Facebook Live for our third winter webinar, World Horse Welfare winter webinar on how to provide good foot care for sound and lame horses. And it's great to have you all joining us. And I'm delighted to be joined by renowned farrier, Dr. Simon Curtis, experienced equine vet, Anna Hammond, and our very own Hayley Penrice, Assistant Centre Manager at our Lancashire farm. Now, if you've been to one of our webinars before, you'll know this, but this is very much a two-way conversation. So when we get to the questions, please do, if you're on Facebook, put your questions on the comments function. And if you're using Zoom, then please input through the Q&A function. By all means, chat amongst yourselves on chat, but if you've got questions on Zoom, then please use the Q&A function. If you're joining us on Facebook, then please do share the live video, and do remember that all our previous webinars, all the way back to June 2020, do you remember that? They're all on our YouTube channel, so please do go and see our previous webinars. We've covered a whole host of topics, and if you've got something that you would like us to cover in a future webinar, then as I mentioned just now, please do email us on education@worldhorsewelfare.org. Our next webinar, which is in a fortnight's time and will be the last one before Christmas, is going to be on how to know if your horse is happy, and delighted to be joined on that day by Professor Natalie Warren. We place a link to sign up for that chat in the box right now. Now, my next job is to share my screen, which I will do presently. There you go. So there, how to provide good foot care for horse, sound and lame horses. So you've come to the right place. Just slightly unusually, tonight or this week is something called the Big Give, which is a national matched giving campaign. So basically, as a charity, World Horse Welfare, we rely completely on voluntary donations. But the joy of the Big Give is for every £1 you give, our pledgers will match it. So basically, World Horse Welfare will get £2 for every £1 you donate, as long as you donate before next Tuesday on December the 7th at midday London time. So we've put a link in to the Big Give. So if you enjoy our free webinars supporting our work rescuing and rehoming horses in the UK to end all across to ending the long distance transport of horses to slaughter in Europe, if you want to support that work as well as our really important education work, then we'll be delighted if you would donate to the Big Give. And thank you so much for any donations you're able to give. Now, before I introduce Simon, I want to get on to the first poll question. Again, this is completely anonymized, and if you're joining us on Facebook, I'm afraid you'll just be able to use the comments function, but if you're joining us on Zoom, you'll be able to take part in the poll. And when buying a horse, have you ever asked your farrier before you bought the horse what their opinion was of their feet? Very simple, yes or no. And as I say, no right or wrong answers, just great to get a feel for what for what you've done in the past. So tonight, first off, we're going to use the same sort of format we've used in a number of our webinars. Firstly, Simon is going to give us a presentation, and that's going to be for about 30 minutes. And Simon's going to look at what to look for in the well-balanced foot, what farriers can do to help horses and ponies with laminitis and those with long-term soundness problems. Then we're going to open it up to a structured Q&A, and that's where Anna and Hayley will join us for the three panelists. And then it's very much over to you. So please, for the final half hour, it's very much Q&A with questions that you submit, and if you're submitting them on Zoom, then you'll have the opportunity to upvote questions that are already there. So if the question you want to ask is already there, rather than typing it out, you can simply just upvote it. Now, with all of those instructions, before I introduce Simon, Basil, can you give us the result of the poll? So that's really interesting, actually. I wouldn't have predicted that at all. When buying a horse, have you ever asked your farrier? 4/5 of you have said no. I'm sure Simon might well comment on that. And if he doesn't do his presentation, we'll certainly pick up on that during the Q&A. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Simon, who, as I say, is a renowned farrier. He's been a farrier in Newmarket for over 40 years. He's, as well as a farrier, he's a very renowned educator and author. And he has also a PhD. Simon might be able to tell us. I'm not sure how many farriers across the world have got PhDs, but Simon has a PhD in equine physiology and biomechanics. Now, one thing you might not know, I do love this quirky fact, and it's rather impressive quirky fact. Between the end of the Second World War and the new millennium, Simon's family plated over 20% of Derby winners. Now, there's many things that comes to my mind there, but I wonder what's happened since the new millennium, and maybe Simon can pick up on that too. So, Simon, I'm delighted. We've obviously known each other for a long time. I'm so grateful to you for coming to join us, to give us your thoughts on how to provide good foot care. I can think of no one better to present over the next half an hour. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So I'll go to share screen. And in answer to the question about why does it stop at the millennium, is I think we've plated either one or two, but I sort of stopped counting. I remembered it when I became master of the company, and I said that if you had me or my family plate your racehorse, you had a 20% chance of winning the Derby, which just shows you how you can screw statistics round to say whatever you want.
Well done.
Anyway, all right. So thank you for inviting me. Yes, I've had a slight but long-term relationship with World Horse Welfare. And actually my PhD, one little part of it, I had a grant, as I'm sure Rowley can remember me, driving all the way up to Norfolk. Well, since I'm in Suffolk, it wasn't such a drive. And I'll show you one little bit of that PhD during this presentation. So Rowley's already read out most of these questions. I was sent these 5 and I know there's lots of other questions. So we're going to look at balanced foot. We're going to say, well, it's always desirable. Whether it's achievable, we'll see. Can we mitigate long-term consequences of suboptimal conformation? I'm hoping to put that in a simpler way and show you a couple of examples of doing that in some mild to severe cases. We're going to look at laminitis, which is this vast subject, which I really should spend 3 days on. And then I think that's the last question about what can farriers do to help horses with long-term soundness problems is partially going to be answered by the others. So what are the most important things we can look for in a well-balanced foot? The first one is that in athletic horses, that basically it would seem that sound horses have these 3 bones in alignment: the digit, so the long pastern, short pastern, and pedal bone or coffin bone, and therefore we don't actually by and large need a radiograph to see that, because the skin and the hoof is so close in alignment to these bones. You can see it when the horse stands there. The reason I say athletic horses is there are some breeds, heavier breeds and cobs, that tend to have a broken forward hoof pastern axis. We're going to look at that in a second. The other thing, this isn't a great diagram, is that distal phalanx should not be flat. In sound horses, it's about 3 to 5 degrees. So from a side view, then this is our ideal, and that is a balanced foot. And farriers can alter these alignments within reason, depending on how much foot there is there, but they can alter it just by their trim and their shoeing in a secondary way, which I'm going to show you as well. So a positive or broken forward hoof pastern axis, like this, this is a club foot, and you can see the foot, this is the left fore or near fore, the off fore or right fore, you can see that as well, and you can see that's in good alignment, whereas a club foot has this broken forward or positive hoof pattern axis. So not good here. As I say, we have to be careful because there are some breeds where actually they are slightly positive, but athletic horses, that is not good. So this is the opposite side of the coin, where we have a negative or a broken back hoof pattern axis. And again, you can compare it with the healthy leg here or healthy digit. Pretty good alignment there. This one, you can actually see because of the pigmentation in the hoof, nearly growing horizontal at the heel. So all sorts of problems emanate from this. You imagine the tendon, the deep digital flexor tendon, being put under real stress by this, pulling on the toe, so stress on the laminae. Lots of things that can go wrong in the back half of the foot, where it's all really soft tissue, and here is this horse walking on the back of its foot. So lots of things go wrong with this. In no breed is this good, and actually Farrier can really help with this, can improve it. I think there was an answer about ideal conformation. Just like most things in life, it's very difficult to get something to 100%, but you know, horses exist without having 100% ideal conformation. It's, do they exist, or can they, should we say, perform and be sound with a 90% decent conformation? Probably not. So it's how we move them towards that better conformation. So that was looking at conformation from the side, or conformation of the foot and the digit. Of course, we also look at our horses from behind or in front to look at their conformation. And one of the big mistakes made is illustrated in this picture. Again, this is a young horse. It's probably only, I think, about 6 or 8 months old. And one would easily describe it as turning out, or we might even say there's an angulation here at the fetlock and the leg changes angle. But that's because we're looking through the center of the horse. And if we look at the center of the leg, so in other words, if we walk around here by about 5, at the most 10 degrees, but probably 5 degrees, we get a different view. And now we can see that this foot and leg is in absolute perfect alignment through the carpus, the cannon bone, the fetlock, the pastern and the hoof. Same horse, 2 different views. We have to be careful how we assess conformation. But in a way, this is ideal because all the weight carried through this single column of bones ends up going through the center of the hoof. And that's really what we would look for in an ideal balanced foot and leg from the front. Here we have radiographs. I know we have some veterinary surgeons in the audience and on the panel, and I love looking at radiographs for balance because I know I'm helping that vet to pay their mortgage. So what can we learn from radiographs on balance? Again, you can actually see the hoof wall here. So they are of interest on the joint spacing, and they're of interest to see the alignment of this distal phalanx or pedal bone. But in actual fact, I think, again, because the digit is so just closely wrapped by the skin and the hoof, that actually a trained farrier will know where those bones are by this. Nevertheless, when things go wrong, radiographs are great for checking. So we have poor conformation here and really very, very good conformation on this right-hand radiograph. So another couple of ways that we should be able to try and improve balance is by aligning the bottom of the foot, the whole solar plane of the foot, at 90 degrees to the cannon bone. Many of my colleagues disagree with this. They can never give me an answer strictly when it doesn't work, but I strongly believe in this because I think the cannon bone needs to be vertical or erect in a standing horse. And if that makes sense, then it must make sense that the bottom of the foot should be 90 degrees to that. One thing I think most agree on is that we need to look for symmetry at the bottom of the foot. Now, is the foot perfectly symmetrical? It isn't actually. It's about it's a couple of millimeters or 1/8 of an inch narrower on the medial side, on the inside. You can see a little bit of the horse's leg here, so we know that this is the lateral or outside of the foot, and this is the medial or inside. But nevertheless, it's so close to symmetry that horses that are a long way off that symmetry often have problems, or there are conformational problems that have affected that. So one of my tenets is trim the foot as symmetrical as possible, and where we can't make it symmetrical, then we try and put a symmetrical shoe on there, and that seems to help a lot because it's loading the weight bearing more evenly through the whole of the limb and then through the hoof. So we can see a very asymmetric hoof here, far wider on this side, so not slightly wider but far wider. And let's see the sort of problem that causes this. This again is a foal, and the reason I use foals a lot, apart from I had a lot of experience with foals, is that everything's always exaggerated about foals. So what you learn, you can see it more clearly, conformational faults. So this has an outward rotation of the right fore, which is the leg on the left. And as you can see, that's pretty severe. I will run it again. So the whole leg is pointing out. More severe than that example I showed, which was just a young horse that was symmetrical. In other words, it was bilateral, both legs pointed out slightly, as is very normal and healthy in young horses. This is clearly not healthy because this leg points one way and this one points out. So this foot will load very much on the inside in the loading phase of walking, but in the pushing off phase will tend to flare this side out, and you can see that. So the hoof distortion isn't causing the leg problem, it's the leg causing the hoof distortion. Nevertheless, it would be a farrier's job to try and keep this as symmetrical as possible, and the horse would walk better. And in a mature horse, which you rarely see as severe as this, there are shoeing options to help. So this is quite an interesting horse because we can see it has two very different legs. Here we have a very healthy leg. We have a carpus or knee that looks quite symmetrical in there, and the cannon bone coming out of the middle and center of it, through the fetlock again, through the pastern into a nicely shaped foot and leg, and you can see the clips in alignment with all that. On this side we have an offset knee, and that's, or offset carpus, and that's where the cannon bone appears to have been shunted over in this direction, so it doesn't come out of the bottom center. This leads to this angulation in here at the pastern, so a fetlock varus, and the foot also coming in and possibly rotating slightly inwards. So we can see the clip here actually aligns up with the middle of the leg. So two very different legs. A mature horse, they need careful shoeing from the farrier. The farrier cannot change this. In fact, even as a foal, there's no surgery or there's no known way of improving this. But along with this also comes this toeing in and fetlock varus. But I'm going to show you an example of shoeing one here. And although I haven't put the previous picture of it, this was the second shoeing, and although yes, it is still toe in, it was pretty bad. Let's have a look at this video, and you'll see that I've tried to trim this foot symmetrically, but then you'll see when we come around the side that the shoe is outside the border of the foot, and that's giving it some lateral support there. And again, it's putting the shoe where the foot should be. So that's a very easy rule of thumb for shoeing horses, and it's often put that way. So we're going to go a little bit, should we say, further down the scale of a suboptimal conformation. This is an 18-month-old, well, miniature horses they get called. I call them bonsai horses because they seem to want to breed them smaller and make them as crinkly as possible. And if you look at that leg, especially on the right side, you can see this poor little thing is not able to even put the foot completely on the ground and bear weight on it. Had this been seen when it was a month old, or at the most 2 months old, there may have been something that could be done for it. What we're now having to do is try to manage this problem. So I have to show exaggerated cases. Of course, farriers don't come across cases like this every day. In fact, one would hope they don't even see one like this every year. I'm told it's quite a common problem in these, well, miniature horses as they're called. But I have a view about why. Anyway, I won't go into that, what we should be doing about breeding them. So let me, if this will let me go on. All right, so this is a CAT scan. So really this is three-dimensional radiography. This was one of the very early ones. And this is of that little pony. And you'll see, of course, its leg wasn't that color, but the computer just chooses a color. We strip the flesh off and the hoof, and then you can see that very poor bone alignment. So this is that little pony that you just saw walking, 18 months old, too late to change this alignment. But we can see what we did. This is the radiograph of that leg. And here you can actually see the glue. So I glued an extension out here, and that helps to move the leg out. And I put more glue under here so that the foot was at least weight bearing across its border. And okay, I am going to show you the result of that, but before that, I do have to put an advert in. I do run webinars. They're mainly for vets and farriers, but everybody's welcome. I have free podcasts, and if you want to find them, you just Google Dr. Simon Curtis podcast. Sadly, in this world, there are two Simon Curtises who are far more famous than me. One's a film producer and one's a musician. And you can find me on Facebook, and I would like that if that's what you want to do. All right, let's see how this little fella walks, and you can just trust your own eyes in this because that's all I've got, this video. So now you can see it's loading more level. It holds that leg a little bit further out. Horses adjust very quickly to what a farrier does to the bottom of the foot. And so therefore, if you do the right thing, you do get a very good, quick result. So let me just show you that again. Now, here's the problem. Since this is not a cure for this pony, it needs this doing for the rest of its life. And that glue would last about 3 months, but the farrier needed to trim it every month to realign it with that leg. So this was referred into me quite a number of years ago. The farrier came along that was going to look after it. We did it together, and we kept in touch for 2 years. And this was then a sounder, happier horse for doing this work. But that's management of the problem. That's, in a way, it's not, well, it's certainly not cure, is it? So now that you've seen this problem in exaggeration, lots of horses have this far more subtly. And this was a sports horse, and you can see this bend in the alignment of the digit with the cannon bone above, and you can actually see this swelling on the fetlock here. So this is the left hind or near hind, and then when I shot it, I didn't need to jack it up on the inside. Now this looks far more in alignment, and you might think, well, he's put the shoe outside the line of the hoof a little bit, like I showed earlier. Excuse me. But here you can see just how much extra metal I've put outside this foot. And if you take these two views, this is this edge here, because obviously the foot's turned around the other way. So a long way outside. But again, when you see it here, you can actually draw your own imaginary line down through there into the middle of this foot. And now there's sort of equidistant. So again, that tenet of putting the shoe where the foot should be, we got immediately better alignment. So that's a more conventional view of these two with the camera almost on the ground. So you saw it in exaggeration, and now you can see a more subtle example or illustration of extension shoeing, of where we can't get it all right just by trimming. We bring about some more biomechanical effect, and in a way this shoe moved this foot out in this direction, out here, and therefore it becomes more aligned. Okay, we're back to probably the most severe conformational fault you're going to see, but this is the difference. This is a 1-month-old foal, and you can see how unstable the hock is and how fetlock there is. So just like that little pony, it's walking on the outside of its foot, bearing all its weight there. And this, as I said, I'd show you something from my PhD. I used a pressure mat on a lot of foals to look at how they bore weight, how they loaded their weight through their hooves, and how that changed as they got older. So if we now look at this with a similar extension to what you saw on that little pony, if anything proportionately bigger, and this foal is still a bit tipsy because it was sedated for this work, and so now you can see just how stable that hock is and how better aligned the foot and the limb. Obviously it would revert immediately you took that off, but actually, because they're developing, that we get really good results by doing this, permanent results, because we're working on young foals. We're not just leaving them as that poor little pony had obviously been left and ignored, and therefore couldn't work. And so that's the pressure mat showing the loading after that shoe's put on, and you can see we've really shifted it. There's an arrow comes up. We've shifted it from this side of the foot. Almost, it's now loading more on the medial side. So we can do things biomechanically with shoeing. All right, let's look at this. This is a view from a side, often described as a bull-nosed foot, and you can probably see why it takes on that shape. This is not created by a farrier. The only rasping is just this little bottom at the end. And if we look at a radiograph of this same foot, we can see that angle that I showed in my, I think, second slide. And this would be called a negative angle because it's tipping backwards, whereas it should tip forwards at 3 to 5 degrees. As I said, it's probably tipping back by 5 degrees. So all sorts of problems are happening here, loading there, but also remember that tendon that comes all the way around here. It's stretching the tendon. That's ramming this little navicular bone into the joint here. It's crushing some of the soft tissue here. All sorts of things go wrong with this conformation. Can we help it? Well, this is where you see why I stuck to shoeing horses rather than photography. This is that foot after it's been trimmed. Still looks very peculiar because it has this bull-nosed curve, but we've tried to drop the toe to the ground. And then the shoeing, it is elevated here. So the elevation or wedging of feet went through very great popularity in the 80s, and then it was realized that all you do is crush the heels even more, and you only get a temporary improvement. And now, of course, we've got some great pads, and you can just see that pink there. That is a soft cushioning, and actually it stops the crushing, it stops the bad effect of elevating. So this puts that bone in a far better alignment. And actually, once the loading is taken off the back here by improving the shape, with these sort of cases, you really do get good results and very satisfying results. I wanted to just touch on upright or club for no other reason than that I'm forever hearing people talk about an upright club foot, and including farriers and including vets say that. And they are two entirely different things. There is no link with them apart from a steep dorsal hoof wall. So here we see an upright foot the other side, and again, this is a sports horse, 57.3 degrees. That's probably a little bit higher than a horse of this sort of age, and I think this was probably 10 years at this age, would be probably below 55 often. But up here at 67.3 degrees, so 10 degrees difference. Why is this not a club foot? Well, if you look at it, remember what I said about alignment of the flanges. This is perfectly aligned, as this is. So all that is different about those 2 feet is the actual angle of the digit of the pastern and the hoof combined. Why would a horse get an upright foot? Well, there seems to be 2 theories. One is that it's got a shorter leg, another is that it's got an injury, and it's very difficult to measure legs, so very difficult to prove. I've certainly seen it occur with a horse getting a non-weight bearing injury or very less weight bearing, and therefore the hoof tries to make up for that. It's less weight bearing, so it grows very quickly and it tries to bear weight evenly. This is a club foot, and we can see this broken forward hoof pastern axis, and it is creating this shape here. So they're not linked. I'll just go on from there. This is the upright foot, very narrow and contracted, whereas a club foot almost, and that's always a front foot, a club foot, takes on this almost hind shape. So different mechanics going on, different causes, different outcome. They shouldn't be confused just because they've both got a very steep dorsal hoof wall. So what can farriers do to horses and ponies with acute and chronic laminitis? Well, the first thing they can do is actually get the owner to phone the vet immediately if it's got an acute. If you suspect it's an attack, and farriers go more regularly to horses usually than veterinary surgeons, you must tell the owner to put it in the stable, close the stable door, and phone the veterinary surgeon that minute. There's lots of treatments for this, but the reason I'm not going to go into detail is this is a flow chart that I put in my second book, and it's been slightly worked on since then. One of the reasons that we still are not getting to grips with laminitis, and we know the triggers, we still don't actually know what's going on at a microscopic level in the lamellae. And people that have worked on this half a lifetime still don't know. Farriers don't deal with that side. They deal with the mechanics of trying to make the horse more comfortable, trying to help them recover. So laminitis is a whole day of subject. The most important thing to remember is that first aid that I said. If you save your horse, then you can start saying, how can we get the best out of this hoof? So first aid, and the other thing I should have said is one thing that your farrier should do there and then is give digital support. There's a number of ways. This is one way that's been used, a cushioning here, taped onto the foot. I prefer the dental impression material, and you can actually see the frog there, the back half of the foot. It gives lots of support at the back of the foot where the horse hopefully can still take it, and unloads the front of the foot where all the damage is going on. And these are other examples. This is a little pony, and you can see this dental impression material which helps, and a synthetic frog in the pad that helps unload the front of the foot. But we often have, most horses actually survive laminitis, and it's what we're left with that isn't great. Many ponies are low-grade laminitics, even if their owners do not recognize it, don't know of any severe episode that tells them there's laminitis. And farriers can continually trim these hooves to a better shape. So this is the radiograph of this foot. And it's a very old technique of trying to realign the dorsal hoof wall with this bone, with the pedal bone, and trying to get this to about a 3 to 5 degree difference. This must not be done in an acute attack, because this will cause an increase in tendon tension and therefore pull on this bone harder, which is the last thing you want in laminitis. So that's a treatment for the long-term And then, of course, we can shoe because we can get that hoof off the ground. There's a gap here. This toe is a modified toe which takes leverage off the front. All looks very ugly, but the reason I'm photographed quite a few years ago with this is this was my horse. And why did I get it? Because I treated it for laminitis, and the owners, once I thought we were on top, decided they were going to pull the plug. But fortunately, I had the horse and she lived another 6 years, so, and a happy 6 years as well. Lower grade laminitic, so mild chronic founder. Chronic just means long term, so mild laminitis. You can see the distance in leverage here. Well, since the problems are mainly in the front half of the foot, we need to improve that, and we improve it by our trim, but mostly by where we put the shoe. So the leverage point on the foot is here now, as opposed to right out here. So we've really closed it up. Just destroying the front of the foot is really bad for the hoof, and I just call it dorsal destruction these days. Trimming it in alignment, but setting the shoe underneath is very good. I'm not going to look at that. So the principles of hoof care for mild chronic founder or mild chronic laminitis is reduce the leverage at the dorsum, at the toe, get sole clearance, in other words, get that flat foot off the ground, and digital support. That's those pads that you could see underneath at the back of the foot. So what can we do? What can Farriers do to help with long-term soundness? As I say, some of that was answered in what I've said already. So very quickly, I can say balance the hooves as best as possible. Secondly, trim or shoe on a 5 to 6 week cycle. Now that's not in the Farrier's gift, but whenever we get a problem, we shorten the shoeing and trimming cycle. It probably means that we should be trimming more and shoeing more regularly than we do these horses. Certainly, top level athletic horses, whether they're sports horses, eventers, dressage, are often shod now, and race horses 5 to 6 week cycle. That really tells you something about the cycle, not letting these hooves grow long. And I know this is probably 4 months growth, not a couple of weeks. And your farrier should engage in continuing professional development. In other words, continuing education. And that's what good farriers do, whether they've been shoeing, sadly, as long as me, or whether they're just setting out on their careers. All of us need updating, all of us need reminding of good practice. So my take-home message really is that foot balance is simple. It's just achieving it is not always so. So that's where Farriery becomes a craft in turning some fairly simple ideals and getting as close to them as possible. Most conformational faults can be helped by good Farriery, and I showed you some pretty awful ones really at the end of this scale. So I'm not saying they can be cured, I'm saying they can be helped, and that might take your horse from an unsound horse into soundness, and it might keep it there for very many years, which has to be good. The only thing I'm going to say on laminitis is it's an emergency. You deal with it that minute. You don't say, can you come back and have a look at it next week? Remember what I said, you give first aid, so digital support, your farrier should be able to do that. Put it in the stable and phone the vet. I hope I've done my best to answer those questions, Rowley, in the world's quickest presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you ever wondered why farriers get bad backs, it's because they do stupid things like this just to get a good ending video.
Simon, that was outstanding, and you covered, well, we talk about covering lots of ground, but you really did knock the ball out of the park there, so thank you very much, and so much to talk about, and I'm delighted. I love the fact that foot balance is simple, achieving it not so. Love it, and I couldn't agree more, obviously, around laminitis being an emergency. If that's a key take-home message. So now I'm going to share my screen again. Thank you. And whilst I'm sharing my screen, I just want to reiterate, you've started putting in questions, and good to see them come in. We're going to go into a structured Q&A now with Anna and Hayley joining the team. But please do put in your questions. And if you like the look of the questions that are already there, then do upvote it on Zoom. So now delighted to introduce Anna, who is a very experienced vet, has practiced all over the world in the UK, Australia and New Zealand, and was until very recently the vet for our Somerset farm. I still haven't quite forgiven her for leaving, but she's got up to set up practice and join a practice up in Perthshire, where, as I see from a number of people who are joining us tonight from Scotland and certainly Perthshire too, it's very windy. But it's great to have you, Anna. And what I love about your quirky fact is the fact that before having children, you loved paragliding, windsurfing and scuba diving. And you must be a bit of a nutter because you have done several solo skydives. What on earth would make someone do that? To be discussed another time, I guess. And I'm also delighted to introduce Hayley, our very own assistant centre manager from our penny farm, which I was delighted to visit a couple of weeks ago. And Hayley clearly has a wealth of experience in rehabilitating rescue cases and ensuring they return to full health. And obviously the Farriery stories that go with rehab cases is fascinating too. I'm not sure what to make of this, but Hayley's quirky fact is that in fact she cracks her fingers at least 20 to 30 times a day. What it doesn't say is that to get people to do things, or is she just doing that to herself? I don't know. But anyway, it's great to have both of you join us. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to go on to the three sort of sections of questions. Firstly, around the importance of good feet, then talking about the owner's role in hoof care, and then just the third section, thinking a little bit differently about feet. So Hayley, I'm going to come to you first. What does the old adage, we've all heard the saying, no foot, no horse, but what does that adage mean to you?
Literally what the title says. If the horse hasn't got even just one functional hoof, you don't have a horse, it can't survive. So that's why it's so important to look after your horse's feet. If not one of the most important things that you can do for your horse, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will come back and just talk about the experiences we have as an organisation and as a charity. Anna, then thinking about, it was really interesting, the poll question about people, the number of people who didn't ask their farrier their view on their feet. But when buying a horse, what should owners look for in terms of foot and limb conformation?
I suspect they don't ask their farrier's opinion because they don't want to hear their advice.
It's very true.
And certainly this happens a lot when we're vetting horses and we tell people not to buy them and they buy them anyway. But I mean, Simon's pictures were absolutely wonderful, and he's quite right. You can see the alignment of the foot and the pastern bones quite clearly from the outside, unless there's an awful lot of fur. And they really should be looking for horses with straight limbs, particularly, as Simon rightly said, looking at them from the front. Make sure that from the fetlock right through the middle of the hoof, you've got a nice straight line, that you don't have any of those crushing looking feet that Simon showed with no heels at all. And I would also be looking at the quality of the hoof horn, because if the feet have not been trimmed or had a farrier regularly, then you will see quite often lots of cracks and all that kind of stuff, and that would put me off. So I think it should be putting buyers off too.
And I suppose, Anna, is it fair to say, because I mean, when people sell horses, they maybe don't always give the whole picture of the horse's ability or its health, but actually a hoof, it's very difficult to lie with the hoof, isn't it? It's there and you can view it, and you've got a good history there right in front of you.
I mean, time and time again, and I've seen a few questions actually from the Facebook pictures saying, you know, the quote was just a bit of lammy. And it's quite common for me to do vetting a horse and to see the divergent rings. So when you see parallel rings on a hoof wall, then you know that it's probably just a marked change in nutrition. If the rings are tight at the front of the hoof and then they go wide towards the heels, then that horse has had a bit of laminitis. Now, when people say a bit of laminitis like it's nothing, if I'm seeing divergent rings on the wall, which is not uncommon for me to see, and owners point blank say the animal has never had laminitis, it's just not been recognized. Yeah. And the reason that should be a red flag as to why is this horse having repeated low-level bouts of laminitis, and you are going to have to manage this horse really carefully after that.
So there's the next thing. There's no such thing as a bit of laminitis, is there?
No, I hate that expression.
Absolutely. Simon, if you go into most feed rooms around the country, it's stuffed full of supplements. Are any of them any good for improving the quality of the hoof?
I just want to say one thing about the pre-purchase before.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, do.
I love your poll. Can I tell you that in 45 years, I was asked only three times in my whole career for my opinion prior to buying. And so I'm glad that you have a high proportion of people attending who do ask their farrier's opinion. Anyway, yeah, nutrition. Well, I always worked, should we say, more in the professional, and they wouldn't ask me what to feed the horse. But from the hoof point of view, we sort of know what the hoof requires. I have to tell you that with very few exceptions, we should feed our horses pretty well. And if the horse is fed well for health, it's actually getting the nutrients for its hoof. If it hasn't got good hooves, it's not usually the nutrients. I know there's a very small proportion of horses where biotin in the diet, and there's a number of companies that make money that can be seen to improve. But the one scientific study on the effect of biotin on hoof growth, I can tell you one very small snip with my nippers is what it produces extra a year, not even, should we say, an extra month's growth. Now, the difference is quality of hoof. Of course, there's speed of growth and there's quality of hoof. And we can see how closely that is linked to genetics. A number of times, especially I showed you a couple of foals. Foals all seem to have good quality hooves. By the time they're yearlings, you can sometimes see those that aren't going to have great quality. Then you go back and see the mare, and fairly often she has the poorer quality hooves. So I know that's a very poor and unscientific and anecdotal way of looking at genetics, but I think by and large our horses in this country, unless they're sadly, they're really negligence cases, are pretty well fed and they get all the nutrients they need for a good hoof.
Thank you, Simon.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, go in, Anna. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I get this from clients all the time. What do I feed my horse for their feet? And I say endlessly, save your money on these really expensive supplements, get your farrier more regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hayley, great saying in the charity, it's just Dr. Grass is what they need, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
But not too much Dr. Grass.
No, we're going to come on to that. We're going to come on to that. Like anything, too much of a good thing is never a good thing. Too much of anything is never a good thing. Right? Do you have, Anna, one for you? I'm sure owners must ask you this. Any tips on how to find a good farrier?
Yeah, so look at the look for registered farriers. You just need to go online and look for those farriers which are fully qualified. So they are members of the Worshipful Company of, I can't even say it, the Worshipful
Company of Farriers,
the WCF, and look for any in your area and go to them.
Brilliant.
Can I add to that?
Of course you can.
The site is, so it's easy to remember, find a farrier. And when it's the FRC, so the Farriers Registration Council, because of data protection now, you don't unfortunately get their phone numbers, which you used to. Oh. So you could really pester them. But yes, you can. And as Anna says, look for the qualifications. But the best thing is usually word of mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose just adding to that, there is a bit of a postcode lottery, isn't there, Simon? Because you can sometimes find there are some dead spots in the country where it is actually
that is true. Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, listen, we could talk about the importance of good feet all night, but let's move on and just talk about the owner's role in hoof care. So, Anna, if I could come to you first, what are the most important things that an owner can do to provide good foot care for their horse?
There's actually quite a few I can think of, but so there's a few plugs I'd like to make in general. I commonly get asked to come and have a look at a horse who's lame, and then I have a look at their feet and I think, well, it's not entirely surprising. He's got shocking feet with terrible angles, terrible foot balance, etc. And I think, gosh, how could a farrier let this get like this? And then I'll ask them, when did your farrier last come? And then they shuffle about a bit and say, well, about 3 months ago, or maybe more. And then I go and try and pick up the horse's foot and it tries to boot me into next week. And I think, well, it's not entirely surprising that the farrier has done such a rushed job on this, because he's going to get killed. So one of the things you can do as an owner is to spend some time training your horse into being accepting of having their feet picked up, and to make sure that it's not a lethal job for your farrier. And then the other thing to, well, I always bang on about this endlessly. The other thing with regards to how to look after your horse's feet would be, it's just very, very basic care and attention, but make sure they don't go too long without trimming, make sure they have adequate nutrition. And also another little plug for farriers and for vets, when you're wanting your horse looked at for hoof problems or lameness problems, please have them inside and not knee deep in mud.
Yes. And Anna, just to pick up on the previous conversation when I mentioned Dr. Grass, what's the obesity and feet? Discuss.
Oh, how long have you got?
Just 30 seconds.
Okay, well, don't let them get obese.
Yeah.
Get a weigh tape. The weigh tape numbers don't mean very much. Often we find when we weigh them, they're about 50 kilos more than the weigh tape says. But it will guide you as to whether you go down. Look online, learn how to body condition score your horse, and body condition score your horse once a month with a weigh tape and monitor. And if it's not working, you need to feed it less.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've just put in, you obviously touched on there about what owners can do to help the farrier. There is, we've done a webinar on restraint. And actually there are different ways of restraining horses, and far more than just chemical restraint, and also the fact of how horses learn. And Gemma Pearson has also done a great webinar for us on how horses learn, and actually being able in very short time, if your horse does try and kick you into next week when you lift up its foot, in a very short time you can really help them and help yourself and help your farrier to be able to do that in a far more relaxed situation. So please do take a look for those two webinars, and we've already put one up on the site, and we'll get the other one up in a second. Hayley, can you economize on farriery costs without risking your horse's long-term soundness?
No. Simply no. If whatever they need, you can't cut costs on something like that.
So I'm thinking. Yeah, so I'm thinking especially the start of the pandemic, it was quite difficult to get out. And what some people were saying, actually, if you have a 6-week shoeing cycle, you can put it out to 8 or 10. Now, clearly in an emergency is an emergency, but are there real risks to extending that shoeing cycle?
Yeah, I think people don't realise that even just a little bit of extra growth past what they're used to can put strain on the legs. So if you can keep to the time that you normally have them done, then that's obviously ideal. But no, if you can't afford to have your horse's feet trimmed, then you shouldn't have one really. If you can't afford to do it.
No, it's a fundamental thing. So I mean, just picking up what you said, because you talked about actually a 5 to 6 week period. Traditionally people would say 8 weeks, or 6 to 8 weeks. What is there an ideal? Does it depend on the horse?
No, it depends on the horse, but as I say, it used to be race horses were shorter a month, riding leisure horses 6 to 8 weeks, and heavy horses, well, 10 weeks to 3 months. But I've noticed that with the increase in value of sports horses and the continual more stress they're under, they are actually shod on a far shorter cycle than they used to be, because people have learned the difficult way how it reduces injuries. And so I would say, why do we wait for a horse for something to go wrong to shorten the cycle, when actually prevention, as always, is better than cure? And if you're doing it to help cure the horse, you could do it to help prevent that problem. Can I just say something on on three things that you can do, and I think two of them have been covered.
Yeah, go for it.
For a good hoof. Bedding. The best bedding in the world is wood shavings. By far, it gets the hoof dry. I know people worry about dust and that. I'm not worried about dust. I'm not, there. Respiration is not my problem. It might be the two ladies here problem, but it's not mine. Wood shavings, clean hooves. So when they come in clean, they should be cleaned. And we've already discussed regular farriery. If you really wanted to help your horse's hooves, if you did those three things, then I think that's as good as anything. That covers 95%.
Brilliant. And Simon, just pick up Anna on something that Simon said there. A lot of people have their horses out at grass. How often should they be picking their feet out?
Well, minimum of every day. I would prefer it to be twice a day, but a minimum of once a day if they're out. And it's quite surprising the number of people for whom I say this and they look slightly askance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a real commitment, isn't it? I mean, yeah. But it doesn't take very long, and obviously, absolutely brilliant. Again, there's a few questions coming in the Q&A, which is great to pick up on that owner's role. So we'll come back to that. Then just finally thinking differently about feet. And I've seen a few questions about this, but Simon, in the UK, what are the main difference between qualified farriers and barefoot trimmers?
Well, farriers have, since the early 80s, had to undergo a 4-year apprenticeship, which includes 23 weeks at college, and are examined at the end of it. And because we're registered by law, if there's a problem, then you can go to our body, and that farrier who's done badly or done something wrong can either be struck off or can at least be admonished. There is no similarity with it, because the law never said that it only covered shoeing, and that's why anybody can pick up a rasp and nippers and trim a foot. So obviously everybody claims to be trained, but the main difference between the two is regulation, really. Training and regulation. I'm sure there are many good barefoot trimmers about, but that's the main problem.
Yeah. So you don't have that security. Okay, fine. Yeah. Thank you. Just picking up on that then, Hayley, then what are the advantages and disadvantages of going on shod? And could more horses and ponies work comfortably without shoes?
I think cost is one. I think a lot of people do prefer to have them unshod if they can, but again, it depends on the horse and whether they can cope without shoes or not.
Yeah.
Thoroughbred types for flat soles, they can't cope as well as, say, cobbier types. So some people like to use hoof boots rather than shoe, but again, that's preference.
And actually, that is a question. I mean, what do you think of hoof boots as an alternative?
I don't think I've really got an opinion either way. Right, it's okay. Not, if I had a horse, it's not something I would choose. I think I'd choose to shoe rather than use hoof boots. I don't know, obviously not done research into it, whether they affect the way of going right over shoes. I don't know, but
yeah. Simon, what do you have a view on hoof boots?
Yeah, I know, and I'm actually in quite a strong position to answer this, because for the last 10 years of my career, at least 75% of my work was trimming. No horse was born with shoes on. So unless you need to shoe it, why shoe it? But the reasons for shoeing is the same as they were 2,000 years ago when it was invented, when iron probably cost nearly as much as the horse, is because shoes protect the hoof if you're going on that sort of going that they need protection. If you're doing lots of work, your hooves will wear out quicker than they grow, and in the end you'll get a sore-footed horse. But the other thing is they improve grip and purchase. And we ask our horses to do all sorts of things athletically on all sorts of synthetic surfaces. So were our horses just to be out on grass and be ridden on grass, then provided that you're not expecting your horse to turn too sharp, then you're all right. But shoeing protects the hoof, and the thing that's often forgotten is it improves performance as well.
Thank you. Anna, final question before we open it up. What do you regard as the most widely applicable and useful innovation in Farrier in the last 10 years?
Wow, that's a tough one. Oh, innovation. No, you really put me on the spot. I'm not sure, because things have come around. Things that were in, like someone was talking about, things that were done in the 80s went out of fashion and then came back in fashion and went out of fashion again. I think the things that I've loved the most, and that I think there's been some innovation in the last 10 years, has been all the types of impression materials that you can put under horses' feet to make them more comfortable for laminitis.
Yeah.
I feel like I've tried almost every one on the market, and to see which ones seem to give me that perfect balance of being a little bit soft and squidgy, but still firm enough to not just splay out everywhere. And so I think actually those materials that we put underneath horses, either under heart bar shoes or as some kind of sole preparation to help the laminitics, I think there's been quite marked improvements in those products over the last 10 years. But Simon might be better placed to answer this question than me.
No, I thought that was an excellent answer. Simon, anything to add?
Well, it was an excellent answer, because I would have gone for dental impression material as well. And I love calling it that, because that's what it is. And of course, they give it an equine name and charge us 5 times as much as anybody else. But we know that happens in the horse world. But yes, I mean, I even agree on that. I just say soft or harder. Some of my colleagues will tell you the Shore value, whether it's a Shore 40 value or Shore 6. I don't know, but it's also those frog support pads, so it's really re-engaging the back of the foot with the ground, and I think that's been a big improvement from improving just low level unsoundness to really quite severely unsound. The other thing, of course, is that we have now some really good glues and repair materials, although actually they've been about for over 20 years, but it only seems the last 5 years where most farriers have got to grips with them.
Brilliant. Excellent. Listen, I blinked and suddenly there's loads of questions there. There weren't many when I just last asked. But what's brilliant is that people are joining us from literally all over the world. I mean, of course, across the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales, are very windy parts of Britain and Ireland. Someone from Dublin joining us, Canada and the US, New Zealand, someone who's just, I think, was it a saddle fitted, I say, in New Zealand. And what's lovely is from Guatemala as well, and from Zaragoza, which I think may be the team, the World Horse Welfare partner in Guatemala. So it's brilliant to have everyone joining us. And to pick up on the barefoot or the no shoes, and I think, Anna, I'll put this question to you first. The Swedish show jumpers in Tokyo did very well and didn't have shoes on. Can you see this catching on for dressage or show jumpers in the UK?
I mean, it's sort of catching on already. As Simon, I feel like Simon might have answered this question already, in that it depends on the surface in which you're working on. So if you're a dressage horse, and I mean, I disagree with this. I think dressage horses should be doing some stuff on hard, actually, because I feel like working endlessly on a soft school is asking for trouble, especially for suspensory disease. But I do know that, unfortunately, quite a lot of dressage horses come out of the stable, go into a soft school, and then spend the rest of the time back in the stable or in a paddock. So they're not actually, as Simon pointed out, they're not working on hard surfaces, and they're not going at speed round corners particularly. So losing grip isn't so much of an issue. So I can see it being perfectly feasible to do for dressage horses. For show jumpers, again, it's going to slightly depend on the surfaces in which they're working on. And I don't think this is purely for show jumpers or purely for dressage horses. It's for any horse. The fundamental thing is get them trimmed properly by somebody who knows what they're doing, and then decide whether they need shoes based on what they're doing work-wise.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Excellent answer. One for you, Simon. With our changing climate, either very wet, flooding winters and very dry summers, have you noticed any changes in hooves?
Okay, I should have said to my wood shavings bedding is sandy soil is the best for hooves as well, which Well, I think you're just past the Breckland, aren't you, Rowley, where you are? But yeah, it grows the worst grass. But why are hooves healthier on it? Because they're never standing in puddles.
Yeah.
Up in Scotland, my colleagues up there tear their hair out. I would say it is almost an evolutionary process with farriers in the wetter areas of the country. And I noticed that with my Scottish colleagues, they all know how to get their nails up, because if they don't get the nails up very high, the hooves pull apart. So yeah, wet weather means softer hooves. Hooves seem to, the thing that seems to cause the most problems is sudden changes. So, 2 weeks of standing in wet puddles to 2 weeks of hot weather. And as you know, despite the reputation, occasionally we do get that in the UK, and then switching back, that seems to cause the cracking of the hooves if it's caused by the environment. So, but horses, well, I think I've said enough what the environmental effects are. They're better off dry than wet, and that can't always be achieved.
But as anything in life, good sandy soil, good for draining, not great for sand colic, of course, but that's such as life. Hayley, a question from Melanie here. And obviously there is overlap in what we've already talked about completely, but I think sometimes there's reiterating some points is really helpful. As horse owners, what would be a good foot care regime that we could follow to maintain optimum foot health?
Getting to know that your horse's hoof, so you can notice any changes. Like I say, regularly picking them out every day. You can get hoof dressings if the horse's hoof's dry or too wet. You can get barriers, because winter, Great Britain, it's wet constantly, so you can get barriers that can help stop the hoof getting as soft. Yeah, if you can get them to stand in, just to let the hoof have a rest from all the mud and the wet.
Gonna dry out, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. I think this next question has to come to you, Anna. What is going on in the foot of a pony that is slightly pottery and just has a bit of lammy?
Yeah. Your pony has laminitis and needs treatment, which is a very basic question. I hear this all the time. Oh, there's nothing really wrong with them. They're just a bit pottery. If they're a bit pottery, it means they've got sore feet. If they've got sore feet, we've got to figure out the reasons why. There are other reasons than laminitis for being pottery on hard surfaces, but the most common reason would be laminitis. So at this point, you need to figure out what's going on and do something about it, and not just accept it before they have, because these will often happen before they have a big episode. And the big episode is when the foot falls apart and you have a 6-month in the box pony. So if you've got a pottery pony, if you can address the problem now, you may prevent that really bad laminitis episode happening.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm sure we'll have more questions on laminitis as well. Simon, a question from Julie. What do you think of plastic shoes as an alternative?
Well, we have to remember that plastics were invented over 100 years ago, and the moment some rich industrialist invented plastic or rubber, he thought, I know what I can do with this. I can make a horseshoe. So there's a book of patents I saw of horseshoes from the 1880s. It is unbelievable what people have come up with. So we have to say, why do we want a plastic or a rubber shoe? Rubber is definitely bad because it grips hard surfaces so well that we know that the foot needs to slide a few millimeters with every step. And if you stop it sliding at all, then you get sliding in the joint. So rubber, I think, is not great. Plastics, the main problem with plastics is actually how slippery they are on many surfaces. And a good colleague of mine who's made the imprint shoe that you might have heard of has had to put material in to try and give it some grip. So I always ask, what are you trying to achieve? Because people, I mean, I always say it's another day, another horseshoe. Because everybody seems to want to invent a plastic horseshoe 100 years after the first one. What is trying to be achieved by that plastic horseshoe? Is it to give better protection, better grip? Is it cheaper? It's not cheaper, I can tell you that. Yeah. Is it easier to put on? Well, funny enough, usually not easier to put on. So every one of them I tried out, But I mean, I put one pair on one horse, I remember, and the owner, this horse took one step onto the tarmac, and it was like it was on an ice rink.
Yeah.
And they just said, take them off now. That's what I did. But yeah, there's been attempts, and if you look at them, the ones now have really big ridges in them to try and give some grip.
Yeah.
So I think these people need to say, what are we trying to achieve by it? If somebody could give me that good answer. Now, for most things in life, there's 3 tests, isn't there? Is it better? Is it cheaper? Is it easier? And I think most new products, if it does 2 of those, you're probably going to get somewhere with it. But the plastic horseshoes, I don't really think at the moment pass any of those tests.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I knew you would come back to laminitis. There's a question through Facebook, Hayley. How can owners best prevent laminitis from happening in the first place?
Just try and keep on top of your horse's weight. I think over rugging is a big thing, especially in the winter. Horses are designed to lose weight in the winter, ready for going into summer. So try not to over rug, try not to overfeed. You might not think they're getting enough, but they quite often are. I know especially a lot of ponies that rehome from here, quite often in the summer, grass is quite good anyway, but they live off the grass. They do very well off the grass and they don't need anything extra. But trying overfeeding as well. I think got to be cruel to be kind sometimes.
And when you say got to be cruel to be kind, actually it's not being cruel at all. It's we're being anthropomorphic, aren't we? And I love saying that, and I'm just showing off that I can say the word anthropomorphic. But especially with over rugging, it gets cold outside and we think, oh, we must go and put a rug on them. But that's not what they do naturally. No,
and you don't get horse rugs in the wild. They're designed to grow these thick coats to help keep them warm and to move around. So you think, I mean, you might be cold, but they won't be. So yeah, over rugging is a big problem. Because then you just go into summer with these overweight horses, and then you're stuck. Then you've already got an overweight horse going into summer, and I think that's where you get your problems.
Yeah, brilliant. So, yes, yeah, go for it, Anna.
Just one thing to add to that is regular exercise. Most of our laminitic cases that we see in this country, about 90, can't remember the stats, something like 98% of the laminitis cases we see are endocrinopathic. In other words, they're an endocrine derived one associated with overweight horses. One of the reasons for that is that when they lose their insulin regulation, so they get really big spikes in insulin, and it's the insulin that causes the problem in the feet. And one way to massively improve that insulin dysregulation, or make it more regulated, if you like, is regular exercise. There was a lovely experiment which was done in 1980s with a bunch of obese Shetland ponies, and they lunged them for 20 minutes every single day. They did walk, trot and canter. They were monitored throughout. They didn't lose any weight throughout this experimental period. They looked at their insulin regulation before and after, and it was dramatically improved after 6 weeks of having this exercise regime, despite the fact that they were still obese. So get your horse moving.
Can I jump in? Obviously, here we get a lot of ponies that are non-ridden companions, so they go out and they can't be worked. So I know track systems have become quite popular recently. Gets your horse moving more, especially for those that can't be worked, to keep the weight off. So stuff like that you can do to help.
Yeah. Brilliant. And in fact, you would think that we've rehearsed this, because actually we're going to do a webinar on track systems. We've done one previously, but we're going to follow that up. So it's a really good prompt. Thank you, Hayley. We haven't set a date for that, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. Simon, a question from Facebook. If you trim a horse so that the ground surface of its foot is at right angles to the long axis of the leg, like I think you said that was the aim to do, and then the foot doesn't land flat, would you then trim it so that it lands flat, or is it more important that the sole is at the right angles to the leg?
Okay, there's two schools of thought. One is what I've described, which is the static balance, and the one you've shown is the dynamic, the level landing. The problem with those outward rotation horses, which I showed a youngster and I showed our Hoof, is that you could almost trim it down to the coronary band and it would still land unlevel. Now, we now know, because of high speed video and pressure mats and force plates, The horses, just like people when they're running or walking, don't land absolutely level and contact. What horses tend to do is land outside heel first and then roll over. So that's been a bit of an excuse for people to say, well, they don't land level. But you can't see that by eye because there's so little difference. When you can see it, it means there's a problem. And so the farrier has to adjust it. But I know where they're coming from. All I'd say is that 95%, I had to keep it simple, and 95% of foot balance is keeping the bottom of the foot at 90 degrees. Now, you still have a horse that isn't right. Okay, you need to start looking at it dynamically. And there's even a thing called a spiral trim, which gets even more complex. But usually the best answers that are the answer to most problems are the simple ones, which is what I try to show.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. Karen's asked a question about hoof boots. I think we've answered that, so I think we can answer that put that down as answered. I'm going to ask this question to you, Anna, first, and I'm sure Simon will then have some thoughts as well. In addition to caring for horses' feet, what wider role can farriers play in promoting equine welfare?
Well, education of their clients, I think, is a really important thing, and one of the big things that farriers can do, and I'm sure and do, I mean, certainly any farrier that I've ever worked for, is to flag up to owners problems that are happening. For example, laminitis, that the owner may not have recognized, and suggest that they need to do something about this rather than just let it go on and on and on until the big one comes, so to speak. I think also education. I mean, the farriers do play a very important role in welfare because they are training apprentices all the time to come along and help look after horses' feet. But farriers are on the yards more commonly than we are. I mean, they'll be going back to a yard every 5-6 weeks, whereas, we won't be there quite so often in a lot of cases. So they are very, very they get to know the horses, they get to know the people sometimes better than us, and actually a lot of owners listen to them more than us, and then they need their job would be to monitor issues that are going on and flag them, I think, to the owners, and that's a really important role.
Brilliant. Simon, anything you want to add?
Well, I can't add to that. I mean, that is the point that normally, all right, apart from the regular injections and what have you that horses have to have nowadays, vets are normally called in because there's a problem, whereas farriers are seeing these horses on a very regular basis. And actually the bigger yards, it's more than once. There's some and there's lots of biggish livery yards and all sorts where a farrier would go once a week.
Yeah.
So yes, there is that, but it does come down to characters as well. There's some farriers who would say, not my job, and just concentrating on getting their job done and getting out. And there's others that are more observant of the whole horse. So I think that's an interesting point that perhaps should be pushed through our bodies, our various our governing bodies of Registration Council and even the Worshipful Company of Farriers, saying, how do we get farriers to help in a wider way with, as I say, observing what's going on in the yard and horses away from the hooves, and spotting some of these things. And I'm sure that's something that I would support, really.
Brilliant. Listen, we're running out of time. There's still lots of questions, so we're going to do a little bit of a quick fire round now. So if the three of you could keep your answers as tight as possible, you've been doing brilliantly so far, but do even better. Facebook question for you, Hayley. Can you talk about the role of rest and exercise in the rehabilitation of a pony with laminitis?
I know here we are guided by the vet and farrier. As a team, we work together to discuss what is best for that pony in its rehabilitation from Lammy. So it's a team decision. We go off the pony and how it's responding.
Brilliant. Yeah. Good answer. And I think that teamwork is critical, isn't it? That's how it is. And obviously, Anna, you'll be very familiar with that. A question here for Simon. Has the education and expertise of farriers changed in the past 20 years?
we're learning more because of the technology and some of the science. So the education, we were talking about trimming. There's a module now that the young or the apprentice farriers, it's just on trimming, whereas it just used to be shoeing. So they're now going to be examined on the unshod horse, which is a good step forward. So they're not just thinking about trimming a foot to put a shoe on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Question for you, Anna. Do you have any advice on prevention and management of hoof abscesses?
Yes. Let the feet dry out, get them in, and don't have them soaking in wet 24 hours a day, as Simon has said. And you often find, because the abscesses tend to be a winter thing that we see on very wet pasture. And the other one, again, I mean, I feel like a stuck record. Get their feet trimmed regularly.
Excellent. Hayley, is there any point in putting hoof oil on a horse's feet?
We do use it here for those that have got dry feet, or those that have, the feet are getting crumbling because they're getting too wet. So we do use them here. I think they do work, but you have to be quite religious, and you can't just put it on once or twice a week. You've got to be quite religious with it. Brilliant.
Any other comments there?
Yeah, can I say that it seems that the lanolin based ones are better.
Right.
You know, they just seem to just create a better hoof.
Brilliant. Anna, how do I prevent thrush in my draft horse?
Pick its feet out every single day. Get your farrier to trim them regularly. Don't leave them for 3 months, and when they get trimmed, the frogs will get a good trimming at that point. Once the frog has had all the dirty material cut out of it by your farrier, my favoured, and I'm sure Simon will have his own favoured potion, but my favoured potion is sugar and iodine, commonly called sugar down, to dry out what's left of the frog. And if you have to be radical, chop the frog right back.
Brilliant.
Okay. If I can just add, the real trick is to stuff with cotton wool. And the owner needs to pull that out every 2 days if it hasn't worked its way out. They worry the frog will not heal over the cotton wool. It just lets the air in, it keeps the muck out. If you do that, you can use the sugardeine, you know, iodine solution's great. Hydrogen peroxide, be careful, horse might explode. Or there's a few other topical antibiotics, but the real trick is the cotton wool. So everybody listening today, most horses get thrush at some point. Try the cotton wool trick. You can't stuff too much in.
You heard it here
fix
first.
it in a week.
Jill actually asked, of course, we've talked a lot about laminitis, but nothing about navicular. Simon, what advice would you give to an owner with a navicular horse?
Well, I think nowadays, again, because of MRI, especially, and better diagnostics, the classic navicular of that erosion of the flexor surface is all that's left being called that. Most of them, from my point of view, again, I can only work on the mechanics of the foot and the conformation. So in some ways, whatever the problem is, if it's in that back half of the foot, I do a very similar thing, which I half showed you today, really, that I you know, try and get the weight moved forward onto the toe, but the toe back and release that leverage.
Brilliant. Simon, I'm going to stick with you. What age should a foal be for their first foot trimming?
4 weeks old as routine, and every 4 weeks after that.
Is there any advantage in using copper-coated nails?
Yes, that's been proven, and you're introducing microbes into the foot with every nail you put in. Copper, we know, has a good antimicrobial effect.
Excellent. Sticking with antimicrobial, Simon, is using nail hole disinfectant worth the time and money?
Well, I think it's for the same reason. I mean, I never did that. I know some people in some countries use it a lot. I don't know how effective it is, but I do know that copper-coated nails, we should say, because there's still steel underneath, is actually effective.
Thank you. Anna, to stud or not to stud, which is more damaging?
It's going to be, the question is, why are you putting studs in? And I'm assuming it's because you're working in a quagmire situation, in which case I don't know that you call studs damaging if you're using them in a situation where they're going to sink straight into the ground and try and give you a bit more grip, which should be the situation you're using them in. If you put studs on when the ground is hard, then yes, that is damaging, because you're changing the biomechanics of the way the foot lands. But as long as you're putting studs in when the ground is soft, then that's not damaging, and I understand why you would be doing it.
Brilliant. And Simon, just to follow up on that, is it better to use one in outside heel only, or put a stud in each heel?
Only the polo farriers say just use one, because they say these fast turning horses rotate on that stud. Not sure myself, but if you're going to put studs in, I think by and large put 2 in, because
Excellent.
otherwise you're twisting the foot with every step.
Hayley, is it best to box rest a pony with laminitis, or give them the option to move around?
Box rest. You don't want them walking around. Definitely box rest. Sick bed if you can.
Brilliant. Question from Gillian. Simon, how important is it for the hoof to flex?
Well, absolute importance. It's part of its function, and shoeing restricts it a little bit. That's one of the reasons we put the nails at the front of the foot, is that it's mainly the back of the foot that's flexing. But sometimes when we glue shoes on, we glue the back of the foot, and although there is still flexibility in glue, we are restricting it. So yeah, a healthy foot is supposed to flex with every step.
Brilliant. I'm going to come to you've done brilliant. I'm going to come to each of the panelists very shortly and just ask for your final thoughts. But you've done brilliant. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's put in questions. We've got over the halfway line. We've answered 22. There's 9 outstanding. I'm sorry we couldn't get through to all of them, but thank you to all of your questions. Now we've got through a lot this evening, and some really sort of wonderful practical advice for people to take home. Hayley, having heard everything you've heard this evening, what would your final thoughts be? What's your take home message?
That hoof health is very important. You need to keep on top of farrier visits. I may get it started straight away, but yeah, it's your horse's hoof health is the most important thing that you can look after for your horse, so keep on top of it.
Brilliant. No foot, no horse. Anna?
A pottery horse is pottery because it's got sore feet. Sort them out.
There you go. Excellent. Thank you, Anna. Simon?
I desperately tried to think of something to finish up with. I don't know. Keep supporting your farrier. Have regular foot care from good farriers.
Brilliant. And hopefully we've given you what do we mean by good farrier, and what do we mean by a good farrier, and how to find one. So hopefully you've got that. Listen, thank you to everyone again for answering for putting in questions, and apologies again to those who I haven't been able to. And before I thank our panelists, I just want to say, remember, if you've got topics you want us to cover, like we've covered on foot and foot health tonight, then please do email education@worldhorsewelfare.org. Don't forget that our next webinar on how to know if your horse is happy, December the 15th, with Professor Nat Warren from New Zealand. We've got a link to sign up for that. And finally, just please do remember the big give, and we'll put a link in there. But any donation you give between now and next Tuesday will mean that World Horse Welfare gets for £2 for every £1 that you donate. So if you enjoy these free webinars, do please consider donating. Anything you can give will be really gratefully received. So finally, just a huge thank you to Simon, to Anna, and to Hayley. I worked you hard tonight, and you came up smelling of roses. So I can't thank you enough for being excellent panelists, answering so many questions, giving so much practical advice. I really hope everyone goes away energized about how hoof health is so important. No foot, no horse. Until then, I look forward to seeing you in a fortnight, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.